Welcome to this Just Stop Oil call, an emergency response to the announcement of the 100 new oil and gas licenses that will catastrophically be granted in the autumn. This is a response to that call with what we can do about it. Really, really happy to see you all here. If you do need captions, please just go to the bottom of your screen and you can enable them. And any problems at all, please just message the tech hosts. And you'll be able to message in the chat just the tech hosts. You will all have an opportunity to feedback about how you feel and what you might do. So please hold that until the breakout rooms when you'll be able to also share and ask questions. So while the speakers are speaking, we're not allowing people to message them or to ask questions at that time, but you will have an opportunity. So please stay on for that, the most important part of the call. Despite the fact the speakers are brilliant, we do want you to stay and feedback and say what you can do. Brilliant. I just want to say before we start as well that if you find what is said during the call triggering, difficult, emotionally hard to handle, we do have a Resilience to Resist team who will be able to support you, and we will be posting a link in the chat for you as well. So if you do need support, that is available to you. And during this call, we'll also be asking you to download a Signal Messenger if you haven't already, because that's our preferred method for contacting people. And if you're able to do that, it will smooth things so incredibly. So Signal Messenger, and we'll pop a link into the chat for that too. Okay. So I'm just going to wait. There's a few more people just joining, and then we're just going to start with a short intro, and then we can get straight on to listening to our brilliant speakers. So thank you again for joining this emergency meeting hosted by Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil, ordinary people with a primary aim to demand the UK government immediately halts all new oil and gas licensing and consents. Rishi Sunak's announcement of his plans to license 100 new oil and gas licenses this autumn is nothing short of genocide. People are reacting with despair, with horror, with disbelief. Politicians, charities, ordinary people, speaking out against this abomination. But speaking out, it is not enough. Just Stop Oil are again stepping up into resistance. In this meeting, as well as hearing from inspirational speakers, you're going to find out how people like you and me can step up too and make a difference. Acting together, acting as one, bravely facing the truth, and acting to make a difference. We cannot let these licenses happen. We need to do whatever we non-violently can to stop them. Our very lives depend on it. We'll start off tonight hearing from our amazing diverse range of speakers. The talks will then be followed by breakout rooms, and you'll be in a smaller group with a facilitator who will enable you to discuss how you feel about what you've heard and what you can do. These will last about 15 to 30 minutes, so please make sure that you stay on after the speakers finish to share with other people. We'll be talking about our pathways to action. And at this critical time, the first pathway to action we want to present to you is people are committing to a slow march with their region in London for a week and to risk arrest at least once. And we'll hear more about why slow marching and the arrest are vital at this time from one of our speakers later on. The second thing, to enable you to take part in that civil resistance, is to do our action training, which is brilliant training in non-violence to help you with the skills and the knowledge that you need to take that action, and also to welcome you into a community of trust, which will make that possible. And we are also asking everybody if they can make a regular donation. People are giving 1 hour's wage a month, but we would invite you to give whatever you can. That regular amount will really, really help us enable everybody that wants to take action with us. So those are the demands, those are the asks. So those are the asks. So when you go into the breakout rooms, those are the things that your breakout facilitators can remind you, and so that you'll be able to decide what you can do. And it is a critical time. The links will be in the chat, so that any of those things at any time, you'll be able to access them and click on them and make your pledge. So without further ado, I'm just going to go straight to our first speaker. I'm delighted this evening to have Dr. Aaron Thierry with us. Dr. Aaron Thierry received a PhD in ecology from the University of Sheffield. He subsequently researched the impacts of global warming on the carbon cycle in the Arctic ecosystems at Edinburgh University. His studies have led him to be extremely concerned about the impacts of disruption on the climate. This has led him to dedicate his time to being a passionate advocate for environmental and social justice. Aaron is one of the co-founders also of the Scientists of Extinction Rebellion.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yep. So good evening. Thank you for spending your time coming to this talk. I'm going to start by asking this question, which is explaining why Rishi Sunak is a dangerous radical. And I'm going to do this from the point of view of the science, and that's that I'm familiar with. So making a case for why we need to end fossil fuels entirely. So the Paris Agreement, which was signed by all world governments in 2015, had a promise, and that promise was to hold global temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, in recognition that this would significantly reduce the impacts and risks from climate change. So all world governments have recognized that this is a vital goal and have promised to do it. Now, science can be very clear about what's necessary in order for us to achieve that goal, because the total amount of carbon dioxide emissions is proportionally related to the amount of temperature increase that we see. It's pretty much linear. So the more CO2 we emit from burning fossil fuels, the higher the temperature will go. This tells us that we have a carbon budget. The carbon budget is basically the amount of carbon we can burn to stay within any given temperature increase. So there's a carbon budget for 1.5 degrees Celsius, and there's a slightly larger carbon budget for 2 degrees Celsius. So to stay within those temperature agreements, we have to stay within that limit of that carbon budget. However, the governments of the world are not following policies that would keep us anywhere near those targets. Currently, we have far more fossil fuel reserves than would be compatible with staying within that carbon budget. A recent analysis carried out by Carbon Tracker as part of the new Global Registry of Fossil Fuels found that there was 7 times more fossil fuels as reserves on the fossil fuel companies' books than is compatible with the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees Celsius. As Mark Campanale, the CEO of Carbon Tracker, said, when we're in a situation where you've got 2, 3, 4 times more fossil fuels in development for the remaining carbon budget, then that tells you that policy is more than slightly out of sync. It is fundamentally out of sync. We have a massive gap between political reality and physical reality, and ultimately the physical reality will always trump the political one. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is also incredibly clear on this. In their most recent report, they've said that about 30% of oil, 50% of gas, and 80% of coal reserves will remain unburnable if warming is limited to even 2 degrees Celsius. This is not a unique position. All scientific authorities conclude the same thing. So the UN Environmental Programme has pointed out that world governments currently plan to produce more than twice the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than would be consistent with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The International Institute for Sustainable Development have pointed out that according to a large consensus across multiple model climate and energy pathways, developing any new oil and gas fields is incompatible with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Dr. Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, has said that if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas and coal from now. And he said that a couple of years ago. This spring, a group of hundreds of the UK's leading scientists wrote to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to say that this is, that we need a commitment not to approve any new development of onshore or offshore oil and gas fields. They go on to say that the UK should commit to preventing any new oil and gas development, and the government should state this commitment clearly in the forthcoming net zero strategy. They also said that there is now an overwhelming evidence that the UK is far better served by a rapid transition to a domestic clean energy sources, particularly renewables, and the decarbonisation of our economy. Doubling down on fossil fuels will not lower energy bills or enhance our energy security. Likewise, hundreds of leading medical professionals have written to the Prime Minister with similar concerns. And this February, there was a letter signed by institutions with a combined membership of more than 250,000 members, including the British Medical Association, the Faculty of Public Health, and the Royal College of Physicians, Paediatricians, Obstetricians, and Gynecologists and Psychiatrists. And yet, even as scientists warn that new oil and gas is completely at odds with our green goals, the following day, the UK government defied those warnings with new oil and gas licenses. If we continue burning fossil fuels, we're on course to roughly 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. Currently, this stat, I think for me, summarizes what's at stake. So this is a map of world temperatures, and you can see in the black area, the area in 2020 that had a mean annual surface temperature of more than 29 degrees Celsius. This is home to only a few percent of the world's population, only 29 million people live there. If we continue warming to 3 degrees Celsius, this is what the globe will look like. Large areas of the tropics will become as hot as the Sahara is today. 19% of the world's surface will have a mean annual temperature of at least 29 degrees Celsius, affecting up to 3 billion people. Literally, hundreds of millions of lives are now on the line, and our governments are continuing to pour fuel onto the fire. As the UN Secretary General has said, climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. Investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. And I regret to say that our government in the UK is one of those countries. As scientists, we now have a decision. We have tried providing the evidence and explaining rationally to governments what is at risk, and they've ignored our warnings. Myself and my colleagues have recently written a paper where we argue that scientists are now called on to take part in civil disobedience. And we conclude that we have long since arrived at the point where civil disobedience by scientists has become justified. But we can't just talk the talk, we have to walk the walk, which is why me and my colleagues as part of Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, have taken part in civil disobedience outside the Department for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy, including gluing ourselves and our science to the windows of the department. Some of us, including myself, were arrested, and that's what we feel we now have to do in order to try and avert this disaster. And we act in solidarity with all of those who are willing to take this action at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron, for your excellent presentation. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to go forwards to our next speaker, which Professor Bill McGuire, Professor Emeritus of Geophysical and Climate Hazards at the University College London, and author of Hot House Earth, An Inhabitant's Guide. Needs no more introduction than that. Bill, welcome, and thank you for your talk.
I think we can all agree that Sunak's plan to max out oil and gas reserves in the North Sea is criminally insane. I've yet to decide whether Sunak is dim, deluded, or just doesn't get how bad climate breakdown is set to be. And I don't think most people are. Let me give you the brutal truth. If we look back over the 4.6 billion year history of our planet, there may be no occasion at all when the global average temperature has risen as quickly as it is at the moment, or when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have risen as quickly as they are at the moment. So this could be a truly unique experiment across a vast time span. And we have no idea what the outcome of that experiment is going to be, except that it's going to be very bad. Now, while the government's busy introducing anti-climate policies, I want to say a little bit about how the world has been burning over the last few months. It's been rare for our television screens to be free of natural catastrophes, virtually all of which have been linked to global heating and the resulting climate breakdown. So if we start off with July, for example, July 2023 is the first month when the global average temperature exceeded 17 degrees C. And it's pretty much stayed there all the way through July and into August, and it was still there yesterday when I last checked. We've seen the heat waves building and being sustained across Southern Europe and the United States. We've seen the wildfires that they've caused. We've seen many thousands of people who probably hadn't given much thought to global heating, scared for their lives in Greece, in particular, the fires in the Greek islands. Less well known than this, we're seeing huge heat waves in the high Andes of South America. Temperatures there in the last few weeks have been getting up to 40 degrees C. This is in winter, remember, in the Southern Hemisphere. And this has been described as one of the most extreme weather events ever seen. And there are more. If we look at the ocean temperature, last Tuesday, the global average temperature of the sea broke all records. It reached almost 21 degrees C. And the oceans are critical to keeping our planet cool because they absorb most of the heat that we've generated by burning fossil fuels, 90% or something like that. And the oceans also absorb huge quantities of carbon dioxide, and absorption falls as the oceans get hotter. So those two, the warming of the oceans in particular is really, really concerning for both those reasons, that they may in the future not be able to absorb as much heat nor as much carbon. So that is extremely bad news for those reasons. Also, warmer oceans don't fit nicely with polar ice sheets. So you will get increased melting at both of the poles as the oceans get increasingly hotter. Antarctic sea ice as well has been extraordinarily slow to build over the Southern Hemisphere winter. It's something like 3 million square kilometers down on average. That's an area the size of Argentina. Absolutely enormous and way, way down on what's happened in previous years. So the picture, generally speaking, is looking grim. And I think that's probably an understatement. Something unusual seems to be happening this year. I wouldn't say that we've crossed a tipping point particularly, but there seems to be an acceleration in heating and an explosion of extreme weather, which maybe is a result of a combination of factors that are coming together for the first time. Now, we won't know if this trend is going to continue or whether things slow down a little bit in future years. We need, obviously, more data to see if that happens, but it is pretty grim, to be honest. And I've been staggered as somebody that's involved with climate science in the rate at which extreme weather is striking all over the world. It's really quite terrifying, to be honest. It's tempting to think that this is the new normal, but unfortunately it isn't a new normal, because it's going to get worse. It's going to get very much worse. And there's no point sugaring the pill. It is going to get very much worse. Next year, El Nino conditions in the Pacific, which is a warming of the Eastern Pacific that generally speaking raises the temperature of the planet, El Nino is going to build to a peak. Now, at the moment, it's just getting going, so that the temperatures and the heat and the extreme weather we've seen this year probably isn't directly related to El Nino. Next year, it will really get going, and we could well see the global average temperature hit 1.5 degrees or climb above it. Now, that may be temporary, but it will be a massive landmark nonetheless. And then beyond that, things clearly aren't going to get any better until we massively reduce our emissions. They need to come down something like 50% in less than 7 years to have any chance of staying permanently below that 1.5 degree C level. And I'm on record as saying that's practically impossible. I cannot see how that can actually happen. I'm not saying we don't need to fight. We need to fight even harder as a consequence of that. But things are going to get worse. And I've got a feeling that the real hit is going to come in future years and future decades from food supply. We're really seeing that being affected this year. The rice harvest in India was severely impacted by extreme weather, so they've banned the export of all rice except basmati rice. The cereal crop in Europe looks like it's going to be 10% down. Farmers in Britain are really worried about the harvest this year because of the awful weather in July. Across in North America, you have issues of drought right across the cereal belt in the United States and Canada. So we're going to see quite significant impacts on food prices and supply this year. And it's looking ahead to future decades and what the food issue is going to be like there that really gets me worried. The worst case projection I've seen suggests that by 2050, the world will need about 50% more food to feed extra mouths, but crop yields can be down up to 30%. Now that, if you think about it, is a halving of food per person on average across the planet. That's a recipe for societal collapse. If we've all only got half the amount of food, you're going to see widespread civil unrest, and that's playing it down, to be honest. Now, of course, this may not be realized, but it's pretty certain that crop yields are going to take a massive hit in the next 20 years. So it's not nice to think about, but that's the thought I want you to take away, that in 27 years' time, we might only have half the amount of food to eat that we have now. That will affect every country on the planet. Nowhere will be immune, including us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Devastating, but vital to hear. Our next incredible speaker is Nkurunziza Alphonse. Alphonse is a student pursuing a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and management, and he lives in Kampala, Uganda. He's engaged in human rights and political activism, but now climate activism, where he's led a number of student protests at the university, including against unfair administrative processes and laws. Alphonse is coordinator at Students Against ECOP, Uganda. ECOP is the East African crude oil pipeline. He's been engaged in a number of protests in climate change, including the cost of living crisis as well, and protests in May 2022. And subsequently, he's organised many protests against the East Africa crude oil pipeline. The most recent being a joint one with Just Stop Oil students in June 23. I am very grateful to welcome Alphonse.
Sorry, first of all, my apologies for my camera. it's not that clear because I wanted to use the laptop, but there have been a few issues with the laptop as well. My name is Nkurunziza Alphonse. My introduction is the first has introduced. He has said much about me, so I'll really not go in depth about me. But I first have to convey my greetings from Uganda to the UK family, that is the Justice of Oil, and the general public of UK who are attending this call. I'll go straight to our subject matter of discussion, where I'll focus so much I'll first focus much on the campaign back here in our home country, and then I'll throw in much more discussion on the new oil and gas licensing in the North Sea by English Sunak, and how it will also impact the global South, and then we'll have and then we shall pass on the next speaker. So in the first place, as Students Against EACOP, we are having a sound strategic partnership with the Justice of Oil. And of course, we share a similar vision of saying no to new oil and gas. Of course, for us here in East Africa, the government, in partnership with corporations like Total Energies, they are in plans of licensing, of rather constructing what would be the world's longest heated pipeline, which is to stretch from Hoima in the Bunyoro sub-region up to Tanga, near Tanga in Tanzania. Of course, this pipeline would transport the oil by heating, so emissions are expected. And scientists have estimated that these emissions would double the annual emissions that have been recorded annually for the past years for both Uganda and Tanzania. So, as Students Against EACOP, we are a students' movement here that are using strategically civil disobedience and direct action as the greatest tool to resist this pipeline project. Of course, in Uganda, issues to do with the civil disobedience that are not allowed by the regime, and so laws have been put in place to suppress us and to stop us from proceeding with action. As long as you get onto the streets, as long as you perform any action, you risk an arrest, you risk a forced disappearance. The most recent action we had on 27th June 2023, that was a solidarity action, that was a joint action between Just Stop Oil and Students Against EACOP, where Just Stop Oil students orange painted the headquarters of Total Energies in UK, and the 22 of us marched the Parliament of Uganda to deliver a petition. One student went missing for days, who suffered torture, who was brutalized, and so this is really what happens. But of course, what is the impact at the end of the day? The impact of what we are doing, the impact of what we are doing here in Uganda, it is for generations to come. Our brothers, our sisters behind, and the children we are to produce for the coming years should be in a position to benefit from our works. That's why we selflessly take to the streets, we selflessly go to the streets. So now it was so sad to learn of licensing the new oil and gas by the UK government. Of course, this directly affects us in the global South because, one, when you look, of course, it was all over the press that 20% of the oil would be utilized in the UK, but 80% is going to be distributed across the world, meaning that the UK will directly contribute to the global emissions, of which Uganda isn't an exemption, or the global South isn't an exemption of the impacts, of the negative impacts of these new oil fields. So, what we can all do together, of course, the continuation of the slow marches, the civil disobedience, could add a stepping stone towards stopping the government of UK from proceeding with the drilling process and activities of these oils, and how people return to their homes and these places occupied by people, rather than the oil fields amongst others. So I believe still, though there has been a suppression of the voices that are coming out to speak, still, once we continue in civil disobedience, we will be in position to win this cause. Of course, petitions, we can try all fronts, engage the policymakers, engage the political parties, engage the politicians, but over time, civil disobedience has been proven as the only tool that can win this struggle. So, of course, we know that these guys have got a lot of money. Of course, when you look at the prime minister, he's a billionaire. The corporations like Shell, corporations like Total, they are from this. But look at the side of the people, by their side. And so once we collect, once we organize ourselves in large numbers and coordinate ourselves, I believe that the UK government won't be stopped from licensing these oils, but also we also here in the global south will directly benefit from these actions. So this is my message I would convey. I would only still emphasize that it is only through people power, through the power of the ordinary citizens, that we will win this struggle against the new oil and gas licensing. Thank you so much. Back to you, to the host.
Thank you, Alphonse, for your powerful and inspiring testimony. Wishing you all the very, very best of luck in Uganda. Now I'd like to go over to our next speaker, who is Chloe Naldrett, who is a mother of two sons and lives in Bristol. She's been a theatre producer for 20 years, but now for the last 4 years has dedicated herself to climate activism. Last year, she spent a week in prison after blockading Kingsbury Oil Terminal, and now she is one of the main Just Stop Oil spokespeople. Please welcome wonderful Chloe.
Thank you so much, Lou. I'm joining you from the first day of my holidays just off the Dorset coast. I've just relocated to where I hope the signal is a bit better. But Lou, if you lose me or if I'm not clear, will you shout at me and let me know? And I'll pause and hopefully it will resolve itself. So hello, thank you everybody for being here today. As Lou said, my name's Chloe. I'm a single mother of two sons, and I've been involved with Just Stop Oil for about a year since I joined a mass injunction break at Kingsbury Oil Terminal last year. I have watched my children fall in love with the world over the last few years, and they are now going to be forced to watch it die. And I consider it my responsibility as a parent to do whatever I can to prevent that happening. And this is the most effective way that I can have an impact. Over the last 16 months, Just Stop Oil has fundamentally shifted the public narrative in the UK around the contribution that fossil fuels are making to climate breakdown. We've inspired action all around the world. If you believe it's impossible for an individual to make a difference, then the evidence to the contrary are the 1,000 or so of us who are active in this movement, given what we've achieved through actions at oil terminals, through roadblocks, through era-defining cultural actions, and through 13 weeks of slow marching. It's exciting and it's inspiring. And if you want to make a difference, this is the place to be. But make no mistake, this is not something we're doing for fun. We are engaged in a war. That war is being waged by our governments, by fossil fuel companies, by banks, by insurance companies, and by the billionaire-owned media. We are in civil resistance against a government that not only cannot take our best interests into account and act in the best interests of people, but a whole political system which has become incapable of acting in the best interests of citizens. Politicians are lying to our faces. We know they're lying. They know that they're lying. And they're selling the future of our children for their short-term political capital and financial interests. Our government took 54 meetings with fossil fuel executives between January and March this year. The 1,000 new licenses that are due to be granted now are death sentences for us in this country and for people all around the world. How is it possible when fossil fuel induced climate breakdown is demonstrably happening all around us in plain sight, that this can be taking place. But people aren't stupid. We know that when we're in a crisis, we reach for the available solutions. We do not double down on the causes of the problems. As we've already heard this evening, Antonio Guterres has said that it's moral and economic madness to continue to extract fossil fuels. It's a moral madness because every single fraction of a degree of global warming represents millions of people's lives, and it represents millions of hectares of habitable land. And it's economic madness because the action that is needed to transition would pay for itself within 6 years. Researchers at the University of Stanford have done this piece of research. They have calculated that it would cost $62 trillion US dollars to transition to a clean energy system, but that the savings in the cost of that energy would pay for itself within 6 years. And in fact, when you factor in the cost of the air pollution and the climate damage that is being done by fossil fuels, that transition would pay for itself within 1 year. It would also create 28 million jobs, and it would only require 1% of global landmass. But instead of embracing this vision, we're having to make do with the statements from ministers like Grant Shapps, who earlier this week announced £20 million for wind. Wind power in this country, offshore wind, is currently suffering for a huge lack of investment. £20 million he's granted. When in 2021, we sent £236 million of taxpayers' money to the fossil fuel companies in subsidies every single week. When the case for positive action is so clear, it's obvious that what we are in here is a smash and grab. The writing is on the wall for fossil fuels and for those in power, but they have decided that they will wring the last couple of decades of profit out of this system at the expense of a livable future. For instance, Infosys, the company that is owned by Rishi Sunak's father-in-law, have just confirmed a $1.5 billion deal. They confirmed this 2 months with BP before Sunak announced new licenses in the North Sea. Rishi Sunak decided that the connection between these two things was of no legitimate public interest. Infosys also boasts Shell as one of its clients. Shell has now been confirmed to sit on Rishi Sunak's new business council, and they are apparently very excited about driving the prosperity and growth in the UK through the provision of secure, affordable, cleaner energy. This is a conscious and deliberate action being taken to asset strip our world and to condemn millions of people to death. This is, frankly put, genocide. And it's up to us to resist. We will not sit quietly by while these heinous people commit crimes against humanity and steal the future of our children. It's up to us to resist. And contrary to the right-wing media's portrayal of Just Stop Oil supporters, we're not the enemies of ordinary people. We are, in fact, ordinary people ourselves: social workers, GPs, teachers, plumbers, electricians, builders. We are your neighbours. Ordinary people, and especially those who are marginalised in any way, whether they are young or old, or disabled or sick, or because of their gender, because of their sexuality, or because of poverty. Ordinary people will always suffer first and worst from the climate crisis, both here and abroad. So it's up to us. It's up to us and those of us who have some privilege to use that privilege and to place our bodies on the machine until we stop it from working. And as frightening as that sounds, and I understand how frightening it is, the actions that I've taken, particularly those that led to me spending time in prison, are not ones I've taken lightly. This movement is full of amazing people whose courage calls to all of us. There are roles within this movement, roles within Just Stop Oil, which do not involve being on the front line. But every one of us needs to do what we can. And if every one of us was doing what we can, then think about what we could achieve. Where we are at now is the result of 16 months of action by around about 1,000 people. Yes. What could 10,000 people do? What could 1 million people do? This could be over by Christmas. Together we are more powerful than we realise. And I would encourage everyone in this call who's come here to find out what they can do and how they can get involved to please step in. You'll find a welcoming movement full of the very best of us. Not because we're all brilliant people, although obviously we are all brilliant people, but because this movement calls the very best parts of us. It calls the selfless and courageous parts of us. And as scary as some of the things that we're doing are, there's nothing more beautiful than being part of this community. And it is our responsibility and our privilege to resist at this crucial time.
Thank you so much for that powerful call to action. Thank you. Well, last but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce Emma de Saram, a 22-year-old student activist with Just Stop Oil, who's also taken action with Green New Deal Rising and Stop Cambo, and spoken at several international climate summits. Emma set up a community repair cafe and is working full-time as a student representative. And I'm delighted to pass over to Emma.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, first off, thank you from the bottom of my heart, everyone on this call, whether this is your first time going and dipping your toes into the climate movement, or if you're, a seasoned Just Stop Oil professional, just thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening on this call with other amazing, ordinary people. And I invite you all just firstly to just take a deep breath, because we have listened to a lot of information there. It's a lot for any one person to listen to. And if you're on your own right now, it can feel incredibly overwhelming, but you're not alone. You're with a community here, and we are here to hold you. And again, if you are really feeling this, if you're feeling that anxiety, there is a lot of support within the movement that I've benefited from as well. But I'm just here before we go into our breakout rooms to share a little bit about my story. I'm not going to talk any more about the science, because we know that, everything else is quite extra detail. What we need to know is we need to end fossil fuels, we need to end new oil and gas. We can learn a lot more, but for me, that's my focus at the moment. So yeah, my journey into climate activism, like a lot of people, is definitely not a linear journey. I always very much grew up following the rules, making myself extra homework, thinking that, what was in place was just how society worked, and not really to question it. But then I would always watch things like Comic Relief and Sports Relief, and I would be like, why is there this gaping inequality? This is just insane. And I'd always have this urge, and I'd find it really distressing, because I was like, what do I do about this? And, I'd do a bake sale, I'd fundraise some money, but it was never enough, right? And when I grew up, it was when I was actually 16 was when my kind of journey into activism and understanding the climate crisis really began. I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was 16. And I spent about 2 to 3 years recovering from that. And I spent a lot of time alone, and it was very introspective. And I was always very much told oh, when you recover, things will be better. And the world's such a brilliant place, and you can go and travel and do all this stuff. And then I found out about the climate crisis. I started reading books, and there was one especially I read, This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein, which some of you may have read. And and I put it down, and it was one of those ones where I was just like, why is everyone not like talking about this? Why aren't people screaming? Why aren't people like, you know, knocking on each other's doors, like connecting about this? Because, oh my God. And from there, I just never really have seen the world the same again. And I kind of did what I was told to do. I recycled, went vegan. I did like litter picks and community stuff, and it was very like palatable activism, I guess. And at the time, I thought that like that was what I should do, you know, as like a obedient citizen of this messed up world. But there was one moment when I was like running around town looking for recyclable dental floss that I realized, like, what am I doing? Like, this is just, there's got to be something else I can do. And it was like after that kind of awakening, I guess, that I, you know, got involved with my local Extinction Rebellion group, and just kind of like went on this ladder further and further, and seeing like what I could do to push the boundaries and see, you know, this is uncomfortable, but it feels like I'm doing more. And eventually I fell into Just Stop Oil after like several years at uni doing like activism, like divestment campaigns and all that kind of stuff, because one of my best friends was involved with Just Stop Oil like from the very start, and I was always kind of one of those people, I was like, but you're not perfect, so I'm not sure if I can do it. But you know, eventually I've got involved with Just Stop Oil, and finally I've got this peace of mind that I'm aligning like my actions with my morals and my understanding of the urgency of the situation. And I went slow marching for a few weeks this year, and I had just like this moment of realization that like my body and my existence here is exactly where I need to be. And I looked back to, you know, being age 16 and being told like, oh, you can't like go out for walks and stuff because you're not well enough to do that yet. And finally, I've just realized that like, you know, growing up and battling through my own personal like mental health stuff, I'm finally using my body to resist a government which is actively killing us and that I can't trust anymore. Because, you know, when you're growing up, you're always told to kind of do what you're told. And finally, I've realized that doing what I'm told is actually immoral. And the only moral thing to do is to resist that and to resist a government and the institutions and my university, which is all part of this system that is killing us by issuing new oil and gas licenses. Like, the truth of the matter is that it's my generation, it's younger people, it's students, and it's those who's responsible for the climate crisis that will be most impacted by this. And why is it that Rishi Sunak has the right to make a decision that is going to destroy my life much more than his life? And why is it that we're expected to be complicit in a system that's doing the exact opposite of what we need to do to actually survive? By the time I'm 30, there's going to be, it's estimated, 1 billion people living in potentially uninhabitable places. And I know that anything that I'm working towards, anything that traditionally I should be working towards, like putting stuff on my CV and, you know, having a clean criminal record, like that's going to potentially mean absolutely nothing in the next few years. So I'm willing to be actively resisting that system and choosing to step into action. And I've chosen to do that with Just Stop Oil because I know that it's the most effective campaign group that I can be involved with right now. To any students on the call, I would urge you to sign up. We've got a 2-day, it's going to be a 2-day massive preparing for the revolution, preparing to unfuck the system, as we're calling it. We're going to have loads of mobilization talks and trainings to get us ready for our student-led campaign in October. So I'd absolutely urge you to join that. And I think there's going to be a link in the chat. And we're going to have a rave at the end of it. So that's pretty cool. Because, you know, we've got to have fun while we're also unfucking the system. Before we go into our breakout rooms, I'd just like to ask you to think about what action you're going to take. And I really hope you can choose to step into action with us and know that you're not alone. There are 2 choices to make. They're both uncomfortable choices, potentially. You can choose to not take action, or you can choose to join us, ordinary people, on the path to action. I know that I'm doing it for people who are least responsible for this. I'm doing it for my younger brother and my younger sister, who are going to have to deal with even more of the consequences of this than I am. And yeah, I hope you choose to step into action with me. And I just want to thank you again for being on this call, for listening to me waffle. And I really hope that you can have some amazing conversations in your breakout rooms, and that you can leave and end your week on this quite nice Sunday here in Exeter. And I really hope that you can hold this with you and know that there is a place for you in Just Stop Oil, and we will support you through that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That was wonderful. Thank you. And if you're a student, please do sign up the student form that's in the chat. And also that gives you a sign up for an event on the 1st and 2nd of September that will be excellent. So thank you again to all the speakers, to Aaron, to Bill, to Alphonse, to Chloe, and to Emma.